lonely cowboy took in 18-year-old girl who was left tied to a fence by her drunk father. The morning sun had just begun to pull itself over the jagged line of the Wyoming hills when the scream cut through the mist. It was sharp, raw, human. Jake Callahan stopped mid-step, one boot in the stirrup, the other on the dusty ground of his barn. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. Then it came again, closer, strangled this time, like the sound of an animal in pain. He dropped the saddlebag, grabbed his Winchester from the barn wall, and strode toward the fence line. The air was cool with early frost. Horses raised their heads from the pasture but didn't panic. They smelled no wolf, no cougar. Jake's boots crunched on the hard earth as he cleared the barn and saw it. Her girl, tied to his fence. She was slumped against the wooden rails like discarded laundry. Rope bit deep into her wrists. Her ankles twisted beneath her. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks with frost. A torn shawl flapped loosely across her shoulders. Her lips were cracked. Her face, barely more than a child's, was pale with cold and fear. Jake approached slowly, the rifle slung across his shoulder, his hands raised. Then she stirred. Her eyes snapped open, wild and full of fight. "Don't touch me!" she screamed. Jake stopped. His voice came low, calm. "I won't, I swear." Her chest heaved, breath jagged. He saw it all now. Bruises on her arms, old and new. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Blood stained the hem. There was no accident here. Someone had done this. Someone had meant to leave her to die. Jake moved again, slow and careful. He pulled a small knife from his belt and crouched. "I'm Jake Callahan. I live here. I ain't gonna hurt you." She stared at him, eyes like a cornered fox. Still, she didn't flinch when he cut the rope from her wrists. Didn't speak when he moved to her ankles. She watched him as if waiting for pain. But it never came. As the last cord fell away, her knees buckled. Jake caught her, not fully, just enough to ease her down onto the straw-covered ground by the barn. He didn't lift her. He didn't carry her inside. Instead, he unbuttoned the worn flannel from his back, folded it, and slipped it beneath her head. Then he pulled the silver locket from around his neck, simple, old, engraved with the word "Mother," and placed it in the crook of her cold palm. A gesture, not of pity, of memory. Her lips parted. A whisper slipped out. "My father, he left me here, said I was done, like livestock." Jake's jaw clenched. He looked past her toward the road. No tracks, no wagon in sight. Only silence. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. "You're not livestock," he said, "not while I'm breathin'." Then he stood and walked to the barn, returning with a blanket and a canteen. She drank, hands shaking, her gaze still fixed on him, like she hadn't decided if he was real. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. And just knelt again, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and said quietly, "You'll rest here for now. Then we'll figure the rest out." She blinked, a tear sliding across the dirt on her cheek. Jake rose, stepped back, and leaned against the fence post. Above them, the mist began to rise. And somewhere between the broken ropes and the broken girl, the world shifted, for both of them. Jake carried her into the cabin as carefully as if she were made of glass. He said nothing, just wrapped her tighter in the wool blanket and nudged the door shut with his boot. The cabin was small, one room, one stove, and a single bed tucked into the corner beneath the window. The wood walls were rough but clean. A fire smoldered in the hearth, casting long shadows across the floor. He set her gently into the rocker beside the stove, then crossed to the kitchen and began to move, without words, striking a match, feeding kindling, setting the kettle on to boil. He added marrow bones and chopped carrots to the old iron pot, moving with the quiet routine of a man who had cooked for no one but himself for years. Emma said nothing. She watched. Her fingers curled into the wool, still trembling. Her eyes darted across the room, window, door, the rifle on the mantel. Her body was rigid, like an animal ready to flee, and yet there was something else in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but hunger, not just for food, for safety, for proof. Jake worked, without glancing back. He poured water, stirred the pot, sliced a loaf of bread left over from yesterday. The smell of broth and onions began to fill the room, mixing with wood smoke and dust and cold sweat. After a while he knelt beside her again and offered a cup of water. She took it with both hands, drank carefully, lips still cracked. He turned back to the stove. When the soup was ready, he ladled it into a tin bowl, broke the bread in half, and placed it all on the table. Then, as gently as he could, he brought the bowl to her and crouched beside the chair again. He held out the spoon. Emma took it, but instead of eating, she sniffed. Long, careful, like a dog checking for poison. Jake saw it. He didn't say a word, just stood, slow and silent, and walked to the window, his back to her now. Behind him, he heard the sound of the spoon tapping against the bowl. A pause. A swallow, then another, then the scrape of bread across ceramic. When he finally turned back around, the bowl was half empty. Her hands still shook, but her eyes no longer roamed. He knelt again, slower this time, more deliberate. Her voice was rough but steady. "Why did you help me?" He met her gaze. Did not blink. Then he reached for something behind the stove, a thin old book, its leather cover worn to the spine. He opened it, turned to a page in the middle, and slid something out. And it was a flower, pressed flat, dry, fresh. He laid it on the table. A small stalk of purple aster. "My mother gave me this," he said, "the last day I saw her, before my father took me away." Emma's brow furrowed. Jake nodded slowly. "She hid it in my coat pocket. Told me that when the world felt too cruel, I should look at it. Remind myself that even ugly things grow beautiful sometimes." He stared at the flower for a long moment, then met her eyes again. "I don't have much left. No family, no wife, no sons. Just this land and this house. But when I saw you on that fence, I remembered the flower." Emma blinked, and something in her expression cracked. Not broken, not yet, but softening. Jake leaned back. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not thanks, not trust, just rest. You'll have time to decide what comes next." She looked down at the bowl, then at the flower. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's still beautiful." He nodded. First concert here. By the third morning, the town of Larkspur had already drawn its verdict. Jake Callahan, the solitary cowboy who spoke to no one, had taken in Earl Turner's girl. Not out of mercy, they said, not out of decency, but for reasons no man would speak aloud in front of his daughter. "Did you hear? Turner's girl, the one he left hogtied on a fence. Callahan's keeping her like some wounded fox pup. She's trouble, that kind always is. Loose, just like her mother." The whispers poured from the saloon, the general store, the church steps. Gossip in a small town didn't walk, it galloped. Jake knew it, and so did Emma. She heard it in the silence when they walked past windows, felt it in the stares that pressed into her back like needles. She hadn't been outside since Jake cut her down, but she could feel the weight of their judgment through the cabin walls. That morning, she stood by the door in one of Jake's old shirts, tied at the waist with twine. She'd brushed her hair, cleaned her boots. Her chin was high, but her hands twisted nervously at her sides. "I want to go with you today," she said. Jake looked up from the saddle he was repairing. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'm tired of hiding." He said nothing, just reached for the spare hat on the wall, wide-brimmed, soft-banded, and set it gently on her head. They rode together into town, side by side, but the silence around them deepened with every hoofbeat. Storefronts emptied. The blacksmith stopped mid-swing. A child was pulled away from the trough by a mother too fast, too harsh. At the general store, Jake dismounted and tied the reins. Emma followed close behind. Her head lowered just enough to see the stairs, but not meet them. She was halfway up the wooden steps when it happened. A sharp voice cracked the silence. "Well, I'll be damned." An old woman in black, Mrs. Ellery, the widow with a tongue sharper than her cane, stepped into their path, her face twisted like sour fruit. "Bringing your filth to town now, are you?" Jake moved forward, blocking Emma slightly with his shoulder. We're not looking for trouble." "Too late," Mrs. Ellery hissed. "That girl should be rotting in a jail cell, not playing house with a lonely man and his guilt." Emma didn't speak, didn't move. Then came the final blow. Mrs. Ellery bent down, picked up a clod of dry dirt from the road and hurled it. It struck Emma's boot. "Candidat toi l'oeil," the woman spat, venom curling the words. "Get out of here." Jake didn't yell, didn't draw. He just stepped closer, placed one hand gently on Emma's shoulder, turned her around, and led her back down the steps. Heads turned. Whispers rose. But Jake didn't flinch. They rode out of town in silence. Back at the cabin, Jake went straight to the barn without a word. Emma stepped inside, closed the door, and stood in the dim light of the main room. The fire was cold. The floor creaked under her weight. She crossed to the side table, opened the drawer, and pulled out a small, cracked mirror, barely the size of her palm. It had once belonged to Jake's mother, long unused. She held it up to her face. For the first time in days, she saw herself clearly. The bruises were yellowing now, the cut on her lip healing. Her hair, though clean, still bore the wildness of survival. Her eyes, brown, wide, and tired, stared back like someone she didn't know. Tears came fast, not from pain, but from the sharp, brutal realization that she didn't know who she was anymore, or if the girl in the glass was worth fighting for. The mirror slipped from her hand and hit the floor, unbroken but face down. She dropped beside it, knees to her chest, and let the tears fall without shame. Outside, the wind moved gently through the wheat. Inside, a girl wept beside a reflection she could no longer recognize. But behind her, on the table, still lay the pressed aster flower Jake had given her the night before. Unmoving, undamaged, waiting. The sky had turned a dull steel gray by late afternoon, the kind of color that made a man watch the horizon without knowing why. Jake had just finished mending the last section of split-rail fence when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not a casual trot. Not a neighbor's visit. No, these were hard, deliberate, and uninvited. He didn't move from the post, didn't reach for his rifle. He waited. The three riders came into view, cresting the hill that bordered his land, the lead horse kicking up dust and disregard. The man in front rode sloppily, reins hanging loose, a bottle of something dark sloshing in one hand. His hat sat askew, beard unkempt, and his boots, once polished, were now scuffed like his pride. Jake knew him instantly. Earl Turner, Emma's father. The two men behind him were strangers, hired muscle by the look of them, one with a jagged scar across his cheek, the other with a lazy eye and knuckles that looked like they had never healed from too many fights. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward, calm, silent. Earl spotted him and raised the bottle in greeting like they were old friends. "Jake Callahan," he slurred, "the hero of the plains. Heard you been playing nursemaid to my little wildcat." Jake didn't blink. "What do you want, Earl?" The other two riders spread out slightly, forming a lazy arc that wasn't quite hostile, but sure as hell wasn't friendly. Earl dismounted awkwardly, staggered a step, then steadied himself. "She's mine," he said. "Blood don't just disappear 'cause you say so." Jake didn't move. "She stopped being yours the minute you left her to die." Earl's laugh was ugly, like rocks in a bucket. "She ain't worth what she cost me. Gambling debt, food, shame. That girl's been a weight around my neck since the day she was born." Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "I'm not in the habit of raising what another man threw away." "You think I came for a reunion?" Earl snapped. "I came for closure. She's a stain on my name. You keeping her like some stray dog makes folks talk. I don't want her back. I want her gone." He took a step forward. Jake didn't move, didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just said, very softly, "I don't feed mouths that bite, and I don't let cowards claim people like property." Earl's face reddened, hand twitching toward his coat. "She's mine," he hissed. "I sired her, raised her, and if I want to end her story, that's between me and God." "She isn't yours," Jake replied, still calm, but each word heavier than the last. "She doesn't belong to you. She never did." The wind picked up, rustling the branches of the old oak tree that stood beside the porch. Jake turned his head slightly toward it, then back to Earl. "If you think you still have a right," he said, low and steady, "then go ahead, step through that gate, come inside, and I'll bury you right under that oak." He didn't have to raise his voice. Didn't need to. The scar-faced rider shifted uneasily in his saddle. The one with the lazy eye spat in the dust, but didn't move. Earl stared at Jake for a long time, breathing hard, chest rising like a man trying to summon courage from an empty well. Then his eyes flicked to the porch, to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, and to the open cabin window, where a sliver of Emma's shadow was visible behind the curtain. Jake took one slow step forward. Earl took 2 steps back. He turned, stumbled to his horse, and climbed up with more effort than grace. "She ain't worth dying for, Callahan," he shouted as he pulled his reins hard. Jake didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't even watch them leave. He just turned, walked to the porch, picked up the rifle, and set it gently across his lap as he sat down on the steps. Inside, Emma's breath trembled. Outside, the hoofbeats faded, and somewhere between the silence and the storm, 3 men rode away, carrying the weight of something heavier than defeat. Shame. The rain came in waves, pounding the old barn roof like fists on a door long ignored. Lightning lit up the sky in flashes, followed by thunder that rolled low and deep, like the echo of some buried grief. Inside, Jake and Emma sat near the fire, backs to the wall, the barn creaking gently around them. Emma clutched Jake's coat around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and something older, loneliness, maybe, or a kind of quiet survival. Jake fed the fire with another piece of kindling, then leaned back, one arm resting across his knee. The storm outside could have drowned the world, but neither of them moved. They sat in silence, the kind that knows better than to rush a truth. Then Emma spoke, her voice thin but sharp. "I was 15 the first time he tried to trade me." Jake didn't look over. He waited. "He lost a card game. Said I could clear the debt. The other man, he looked me over like stock at auction. Said I'd do for the season. But he changed his mind. Said I was too skinny. Damaged goods." She pulled her knees up, arms tight around them. "Earl beat me after. Said I'd embarrassed him. That I was a curse. Said even death wouldn't take me because the devil had no use for what no man wanted." Jake removed his hat, set it beside him. "He told me I was why my mama died, why the house was always cold, why he drank." Jake still didn't speak, just unbuttoned his shirt and turned slightly toward the firelight. Across his back, old scars gleamed pale and brutal. Emma's breath caught. "Who did that?" "My father," Jake said quietly. "He believed obedience was the price of love. I didn't." He let the silence sit for a moment, then reached into his vest and pulled out a small, worn silver locket. "She gave me this the day she died," he said. "Told me it wasn't worth much, but if I ever found someone who needed something to hold on to, maybe it'd be enough." He placed it in her hand. Emma stared at it, then closed her fingers around the metal. "I'm not worth saving," she whispered. "I'm not clean. Not right." Jake's eyes met hers. "You're not broken," he said. "You're alive. That means you still get to choose what comes next." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't think I deserve this," she said. "Not this fire, not this coat, not you." Jake leaned just a little closer, not enough to trap her, just enough to hold the space. "No one is born deserving, Emma. We earn it by how we live, by what we give back. You don't need to be new, you just need to be honest and brave." Her tears slipped free, quiet, real. And when her head touched his shoulder, he didn't speak, didn't move. He just stayed, steady as the fire as the storm raged on outside. Inside, something softer began to grow. Not love. Not yet. But the roots had taken hold. The wind shifted just after dawn, carrying with it more than the scent of rain. Jake felt it before he saw it, an unease that settled in the bones, made the birds fall silent and the dogs pace near the door. He stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon, and then he saw them. Dust rising, 5 riders, dressed in long coats the color of dried blood, rifles slung low, hats pulled tight against the light. They moved in a slow arc, like wolves testing the fence line of a herd. Jake counted their shadows. 5 men, but only one mattered. The one in the center rode a black horse with white stockings and a silver-trimmed saddle. He didn't need to wear a badge. Everyone in the Wyoming territory knew the name. Marcus Devlin. Jake didn't wait for a knock. He turned on his heel and bolted into the house. "Emma," he said, voice tight but calm. "It's time." She didn't ask what he meant. She already had the satchel packed by the door. Ammunition, a spare Colt, a water canteen, the silver locket Jake had given her. Jake shoved the table in front of the door, locked the windows, and moved to the crawl space behind the hearth. He'd built it years ago, never knowing why. Now, he did. They slipped out the back, boots muffled in dirt, breath quickened. Jake led Emma through the brush toward the old barn. The sky was low and gray, the sun a dull smear behind it. Thunder rumbled somewhere far off. Inside the barn, Jake hoisted her up into the loft and handed her his Winchester. "2 shots at a time," he said. "Then reload. Aim for the legs, not the chest. You'll slow him down that way." Emma swallowed hard. You'll know when." He gave her one last look, then vanished into the stalls below. Moments later, the gunfire started. It came in a burst, wild, erratic, a warning. Devlin's men wanted compliance, not carnage, but Jake knew their kind. If they got inside, they'd burn everything to the ground just to send a message. He picked them off from the barn rafters, silent and exact. One went down with a cry, grabbing his knee. Another spun backward into the dirt, cursing. The others scrambled, confused. Then one got close. Too close. He kicked open the side door of the barn, rifle raised, and swept the shadows with his barrel. Jake crouched low behind a stack of hay bales, breath still. The man moved past, careless, cocky. Jake lunged. They hit the ground hard. Jake's shoulder slammed into the boards, his fist catching the man's jaw just before the rifle fired wide. But the other man was bigger, fueled by adrenaline and the promise of a payday. They rolled in the dust, boots kicking, hands scrambling. The man drew a knife, slashed across Jake's arm. Jake grunted, gripped the man's wrist, and twisted hard. Then came the shot. Not from Jake. From above. The man's head jerked sideways. He collapsed, blood pooling in the straw. Jake looked up. She was still holding the rifle, shaking like a leaf in a storm. He didn't call out to her. Didn't need to. Just nodded. She nodded back. Jake staggered to his feet, pressing a hand to the cut on his arm. Outside, the remaining men shouted for retreat, but Devlin didn't move. He sat still on his horse, watching the barn like a man sizing up a building he intended to own. Then he dismounted, slow and deliberate, and walked to the fence line. Jake stepped out to meet him. They stood 10 paces apart, no weapons drawn, just 2 men with too much to lose. "She's mine," Devlin said flatly. "Collateral. I don't care where she's run or what she's told you. She belongs to me." Jake didn't blink. "You trade cattle, land, contracts, not people." "She's not people," Devlin sneered. "She's my property, and when someone steals from me, there's a price." Jake's voice dropped. "Then send your bill. But if you or your men come near this land again, I'll make sure the only thing you own is a plot 6 feet deep." Devlin's smile was small, cold. "I respect a man with conviction, Jake. It's rare. Foolish, but rare." He turned, mounted his horse, and raised his voice loud enough for Emma to hear. "This isn't over. The girl is mine, and one day I'll come collect." Then he rode off into the morning light, his men limping behind him, the dust from their horses already starting to settle. Jake stood alone in the silence, blood running down his sleeve. Behind him, Emma stepped out of the barn. She looked at the body, at the gun still clutched in her hand, then at him. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said. Jake walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't," he said. "You meant to live." The rain began again, soft this time, almost like forgiveness. And from the porch, the fire inside the cabin still burned. By mid-spring, the bruises on the land had begun to heal, just like the ones on their bodies. The bullet holes were patched, the fence lines restrung, the barn roof, once caved in by years of weather and months of chaos, stood straight again, shiny with fresh nails and new timber. Jake rebuilt in silence, just as he had always lived. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emma rose before dawn most days, barefoot in the dirt, planting rows of carrots, onions, and wildflowers in the garden she had staked out behind the cabin. She mended the chicken coop with wire and leftover wood. She organized the pantry, swept the floors, and even fixed the front steps with an old hammer that seemed too big for her hands, but never slipped. Neighbors who had once crossed the street now came with tools in hand. A woman from town brought seeds. An old rancher helped dig post holes. No one said sorry for the silence that had come before, but Emma didn't need their words. She saw it in the gifts left on the porch. Fresh eggs, a jar of jam, a bolt of cloth. They respected her, because she had survived. Jake said little. He didn't know how to praise, not with words, but he fixed her favorite tea kettle when it cracked and made sure the garden gate always opened smoothly. He repaired her boots without being asked, setting them by the fire each night, clean and dry. But it was the chair that told her everything. It arrived one evening in early June. Emma had been inside, preparing stew, when she heard the soft scrape of wood across the porch. She stepped out and saw Jake standing beside it, not looking at her, just staring off toward the wheat fields, the last sun of the day catching the curve of his jaw. The chair was simple. Strong legs, a curved back, hand-carved arms smooth from hours of sanding. But it was the carving at the top that stole her breath. Her initials, etched with care, small and perfect. Emma didn't speak. She walked over, sat down slowly, and let her fingers trace the letters. Jake kept hammering in a fence post nearby, not looking her way. But he was listening. "You made this for me?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "Figured you needed somewhere to rest." She smiled. The wood was warm from the sun. The view stretched out forever. A place to sit. A place that said, "You belong here." A few minutes passed. The breeze carried the scent of sage and fresh earth. Then Emma said, almost too quietly, "If I wanted to change my last name, what would you think?" Jake paused mid-swing, the hammer resting on the post. He didn't turn. He didn't smile. Huff said, "Plain as water. Then I'd take yours." Emma blinked. And then she laughed, a deep, surprised sound that made the birds scatter from the rooftop. Jake finally looked over his shoulder. She was still smiling. That rare, real kind of smile that starts in the chest and blooms across the face like a sunrise. Jake tipped his hat back and chuckled once. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "It's just, no one's ever offered to be mine before." He nodded, still not quite looking at her. But she saw the red climbing up the back of his neck. They didn't speak of love, didn't exchange promises. But that night, as they sat on the porch together, Emma in her chair, Jake whittling something unseen, everything they needed to say had already been said. The sky faded from gold to blue. The stars came out, quiet. And from inside the house, the silver locket Emma now wore around her neck caught the firelight and glowed. The fire was small, just a circle of dry twigs and pine needles behind the barn, where the wind could carry the smoke without choking the house. Jake stood alone, the paper in his hands trembling, not from fear, but from finality. It was a contract, cracked and yellow with time, signed in the cruel scrawl of Earl Turner, a crude agreement, barely legal, certainly immoral. One girl, age 18, in lieu of $500 owed. No names, just descriptions, just terms, just ink trying to make property of blood. Jake stared at it a moment longer, then bent low and held it to the flame. It caught fast. A blaze of dry anger, curling into black, hungry edges. The ashes lifted into the air and disappeared into the golden Wyoming sunset. He watched them go. Behind him, the house was quiet. Inside, Emma stood before the mirror in her white dress, a simple cotton thing she had sewn herself. No lace, no corset, no veil. Just soft fabric, wildflowers braided through her hair, and bare feet against the floorboards. Outside, the town gathered. Not many, just enough. The sheriff stood beneath the oak. Miss Lark brought her fiddle. Merriweather from the cafe brought a pie and a bouquet. Even the blacksmith came, his hands scrubbed raw for the first time in years. They lined the dirt path leading from the house to the tree, where Jake now waited in a clean shirt, his hat pressed to his chest. And then she came. Emma. Walking alone. No one gave her away. No one led her forward. Because she was no one's to give. Her steps were slow, steady, each one pressing a little deeper into the soil she now called home. Her eyes didn't search the crowd for judgment. They didn't flinch at the sight of familiar faces. The girl who had once been dragged to a fence like an unwanted burden now walked with the posture of a woman who had survived, rebuilt, and chosen to live. The town watched her pass. And for once, no one whispered. When she reached the tree, Jake looked up and smiled. Not wide, not grand, just enough. They stood before each other, hands brushing, hearts still. The sheriff cleared his throat, but said nothing more. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Silver, shaped from a horseshoe nail, polished until it shone. He slipped it onto her finger, eyes locked with hers. "No one's giving you to me," he said quietly. "You came here, on your own, and I'm proud to stand beside you." Emma didn't cry. She just nodded, and in that moment, the wind picked up, stirring her dress, sending the smell of sagebrush through the air like a blessing. They didn't kiss in front of everyone. They didn't need to. The ceremony ended with quiet applause, a few cheers, a fiddle tune that danced across the prairie. Neighbors handed her jars of preserves, cuts of cloth, kind smiles. She held Jake's hand the entire time. When the sun dipped low, they returned home. They didn't speak much. Just poured 2 cups of coffee, lit the lantern, and sat together on the porch as the sky went soft and purple around them. Emma leaned back in her chair, the one with her initials carved into the top rail, and watched the fireflies blink through the wheat. Jake reached for her hand, calloused and warm. He looked over, eyes soft, the hint of something boyish breaking through his weathered face. "Even in Mrs. Callahan," he said. Emma turned toward him, her fingers tightening around his. "Even in Mr. Callahan," she replied. They sat like that as the light faded, the cabin behind them aglow, the world ahead, wide and untamed. Above them, the stars came out, slow, certain, familiar. And as the wind carried the last ashes of an old debt far into the dark, it left behind something new. Not silence, not sorrow, but had to be something, but peace. And love born not of rescue, but of choice. If this story touched something in you, if you felt the wind of Wyoming in your chest, or the quiet strength in a love born not of rescue but of choice, then saddle up and ride with us again. We tell stories not just of the Wild West, but of wild hearts, of women who refuse to break and men who choose to stand even when the world turns its back. Hit the bell so you never miss a tale that dares to say, even in dust and silence, love still speaks. Until next time, partner, ride true.